Well, welcome, friends. My name is Antonella, and I'm the webcast technical support for our afternoon or evening's presentation, depending on what part of the world that you're in. So a greeting to those of you that have gathered live, as well as to those that may be viewing this recording later. And we know that we'll gather a lot more people when we come together and share the recording. A few housekeeping items as we begin. Most of you have found the chat window there in the upper left-hand corner. Please feel free to share greetings with each other, and then as our presentation gets going, to share your questions and comments for our presenter as you're there. Do note above me a list of other broadcasts that are coming up soon, especially March 31st and April 28th, as well as a list of the other recordings that you can still access. If you have any technical needs while the broadcast is going on, if there's any difficulties, please feel free to chat with me in the chat window, and I'll do what I can to assist you. And other than that, those of you from the Church of the Brethren, if you would like continuing education units for participation live in today's broadcast, I'll be posting those instructions towards the end of our presentation time. Other than that, I'd like to go ahead and step aside and turn it over to Stan Duick from the Church of the Brethren to introduce our presenter today. Stan?
Thank you, Anton, and it's good to be with everyone this afternoon or evening, wherever you are checking in from. I see we have people from Indiana, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and we know that there will be folks joining us for the recorded of these webinar as well, and so wherever you are connecting from around the world, we welcome you to these events, and we hope that you find these events to be very meaningful educational, learning, and spiritual endeavors. Today our focus is on spirituality, faith, and economics, and our focus in the webcast today is based on the core conviction number 6 that is posted on the Anabaptist Network website, and the conviction reads something like this: spirituality and economics are interconnected. In an individualistic and consumeristic culture and world where economic injustice is rife, we are committed to finding ways of living simply, sharing generously, caring for creation, and working for justice. This webinar today is part of the series titled The Heart of Anabaptism, where we have invited presenters from different experiences and vocations to share and reflect on these core convictions of the Anabaptist thought. And the convictions summarized that are the nucleus of Anabaptism and its contemporary significance. Themes from this webcast are also the focus of the book, The Naked Anabaptist, and the presenters from different parts of the world, whether it's been London, UK, or from South Africa, as in recent months, the presenters from different parts of the globe are asked to reflect on these convictions and ask how they work in practice. Well, today our presenter is Joanna Frew, and it is a delight to have her with us. She's with the Martha House, and just a little bit about Joanna. She goes by Jo. She lives and works in a house of hospitality that her and her partners run for destitute asylum workers. She has been active over the years working with the Speak Network on social justice campaigns, and is also active in nonviolent direct action on the arms fair and the Trident renewal. Dr. Jo has a Ph.D. in history of the British Empire in India, and so has this macro-micro understanding of economics and spirituality, and so it is a pleasure to introduce her to you and invite her to our stage to share her thoughts with you today. Dr. Jo, please join us.
Just making sure my mic is on there. Thank you, Stan, for that introduction, and thank you, Enton, for hosting this web series. I'm very grateful to you both for the time that you've taken to help me with the technology, and I look forward to sharing with you all this evening. So, as Stan read out this core conviction 6, I'm going to put that up there. It reads, spirituality and economics are interconnected. In an individualist and consumerist culture, and in a world where economic injustice is rife, we are committed to finding ways of living simply, sharing generously, caring for creation, and working for justice. And I'm going to divide this evening into 3 parts, or this afternoon, depending where you are. These will be, firstly, the connection between spirituality and economics. Secondly, individualism, consumerism, and economic injustice. And thirdly, taking action. So what does living simply, sharing generously, caring for creation, and working for justice look like? So, section 1, this connection between spirituality and economics. And to start us off, I have some questions. They've all come at once. Are spirituality and economics connected? What is this connection? How does this affect our personal and corporate spiritual life? And what are spiritual economics? So first of all, what are we talking about when we talk about economics? The definition of an economy is a network of production and consumption, a public or social construct to help groups of people produce and exchange goods and services. So core conviction 6 is about how Anabaptists approach money in society and the way in which production and consumption is organised. The economy is everywhere, and these days it's based on money. So the best place to start is with Jesus' words. So that first Bible passage there, no one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. That's from Matthew 6:24. So this warning takes us right to the heart of the connection between economics and spirituality. Economics, we are warned, can be as all-consuming as our faith, and we are warned against letting money become our master. There are many, many more passages where Jesus illustrates how wealth, or even a desire for comfort, or less than wholehearted giving, get in the way of our spiritual health. The widow's mite, the rich young ruler, and many more. The New Testament letters, and this is the second quote on the slide here, also warn against the dangers of wealth. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. That's from 1 Timothy 6, verse 9 to 10. I hope you can all hear me. I'm not sure if the connection's that great. From this end, it says it's perfect. So I hope it will continue okay. So our spiritual life then is adversely affected by our pursuit of riches or material comfort. What becomes apparent in the Bible is that if our minds are caught up with economic gain, we cannot understand the way in which our faith calls us to care for the poor. Wealth and comfort blind us to the reality of poverty. And this is summarised by Dorothy Day, who began the Catholic Worker Movement. And if you want to click on the link there for her book, you can do and find out a bit more about it. She says, if we are not among poverty's victims, it fades from us. We must talk about poverty because people insulated by their own comfort lose sight of it. But the connection between spirituality and economics is not just about our own personal wealth or lack of it, or our philanthropy towards the poor. It is about engaging in the process of production and consumption. And the Bible also has quite a lot to say about that throughout. And again, it's all connected to our treatment of the poor. And as I go through this, I want you to think about some questions. I'm going to read some passages from the Bible that talk about this connection between the economic system and the poor. And then, so just think about these questions, and then perhaps we'll be able to discuss these at the end of this section. So for these passages that I'll read, do you recognise any of these warnings as applicable to the present day economy? And how is our corporate spiritual life affected by active participation in the economic system of our nation, or in fact our globe? So moving on to the passages. Yet on the day of your fasting you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And that's from Isaiah 58, verse 3 to 5. And from Ezekiel, her officials within her are like wolves tearing their prey. They shed blood and kill people to make unjust gain. Her prophets whitewash these deeds from them by false visions and lying divinations. They say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, when the Lord has not spoken. The people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and needy and mistreat the foreigner, denying them justice. And this is from the New Testament. Again, we're back to Jesus. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And that's from Mark 11, verse 15 to 17. And then in James, "Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you." From James 5, verse 1 to 6. So the worshipping community is judged harshly for carrying on their spiritual practices without practicing justice for the poor. The prophets are condemned for not confronting the rich with their unjust practices, and the rich are condemned for not paying workers fairly and for amassing wealth. Jesus is filled with anger when the temple courtyards are being used to rip people off in the name of spirituality. So back to these questions, do you recognise any of this today? That might be specific incidences or issues you feel strongly about. I think I can click back to these questions. Yes, there we go. So I don't know if anyone wants to raise anything just now. Stan, I'll invite you to come back and lead the discussion.
Okay, there, my mic finally came on. Sorry about that. When you ask, where do we recognize these signs? For us, we're heading down the road towards another presidential campaign, and I think we're seeing it in some of the language and terminology that several of our candidates are seeing, and also. We're hearing more in terms of the place of the immigrant and refugees and all sorts of things with things that have happened, and we're seeing it in terms of political movements and those kinds of efforts to block people from coming in, and then also reductions to Social Security and kind of the government aid that helps people try to survive and to have the sustenance to be able to live. So it's interesting that at least it's interesting that we are as a country, or at least a Western culture, that claims an affinity with Jesus. but yet the instructions, the modeling, the way of being with people of different positions just to seem so far from us in the way that we have structured our economy. What do you notice? What is your sense about that?
I think I can only speak from a UK experience, I suppose, but increasingly our present government is becoming more aggressive in terms of its cuts to social security and welfare and the NHS, our National Health Service, and towards immigrants as well. And it really is quite disturbing. In the media, the slip-ups that politicians make are aired quite widely, and the language that they use when they think that maybe no one's listening, or they've said something that wasn't written down in front of them, it really displays the mindset that we have to protect us, our own thing. We have to protect our own country. We have to protect the people like us. We don't want people coming in, using up our resources. And there's, I suppose, the aggressive language that it really highlights how the conflict with our nation's Christian values as well, where Christianity teaches an openness, looking to others before ourselves, and particularly the unbelievable rhetoric around migrants who are living in Calais in camps, not allowed to come to the UK because they don't have the right documentation, when in fact it's a legal right for them to come and claim asylum if they need to. And we talk about how this would be terrible for our country, but then Lebanon, the country of Lebanon, is the same size as this very small region of England, and it's currently hosting about 2 million Syrian refugees. So I think, the protection of wealth, the wealth that we have in the UK, which, we're up there in terms of being a rich country, wanting to share it is it's not there in the system.
Yeah.
I suppose.
One thing that comes to mind as well is
That answers your question.
how do we define, when you look at this, what you and I have just been talking about, how do we define success? What does success mean in our world today? Is it something that's related to just wealth, or is it a much broader way of looking at life in general?
I've heard people say that I think it's Papua New Guinea, they define success as if you can walk down your street and greet your neighbours and everyone is on your side, has good relations with you, you're a success. And I think that we've just lost that in countries like the UK and the US, where money is sort of the root of how we operate.
It's much more relational. It's relational rather than just focused on economics as to how they define it. So, Enton also states, he makes a comment, wow, it's such a powerful point that Lebanon is doing so much comparatively, and connecting that to the protection of wealth is powerful. Is there more that you would like to say about the protection of wealth? Or that you would like to add? Putting you on the spot.
I think it's probably a good point. Well, it's probably a good time to move on to the second section.
We'll do that. I'll step aside for you. Thank you.
Because I'll say a little bit more about the economy and production and consumption. That would be a good thing to do. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you can all hear me and I'm not breaking up too much. So moving on to section 2. I have to click through all these again. Yeah, there we go. So I've called this section Individualism, Consumerism and Economic Injustice, looking at this sort of the middle part of this core conviction. And I have some questions for us to think about for this section. What really is economic injustice? And how are individualism and consumerism created and perpetuated today? And I really want to look at this first question and what I'll say, but please be thinking about the other question as well. So if the economy is the means of production and consumption in any given society, economics is the study of this means of production and consumption. And since the economy is all around us and we all participate in an economy that is global in scale, we need to understand it from a biblical and theological point of view. And I think it was Juliet Kilpin who gave the webinar from Core Conviction 4, and she showed some slides about global inequality. But for those of you who didn't see those, here are some statistics. So, the richest 1% of people in the world receive nearly 14% of global income, while the poorest 20% receive just over 1%. So I'm not great with numbers, but that is quite a shocking statistic. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's very hard to visualize what that actually means for people. But I'll leave you to think about that and research that a bit more yourselves. And here's another statistic with a link to our website if you want to check it out. I think the inequality we see in a global scale can be epitomized in one mind-numbing fact. In 2006, the world's richest 497 people, I think that's helpful, that's a number that you can get your head around, and maybe a church hall or a university lecture theatre. The world's richest 497 people were worth $3.5 trillion, which represents 7% of the world's total GDP. That same year, the world's lowest income countries, which housed 2.4 billion people, were worth just $1.6 trillion, which represents 3.3% of the world's gross domestic product, which is what GDP means. This means that 0.00007% of the world's population are worth over twice as much as the poorest 34% of the global population. It's quite a lot of numbers, but I think you can get that the scale of inequality is pretty much impossible to quantify. And there's a very few people at the top of that scale and very many at the bottom. And it's just a picture of the kind of different living conditions that exist side by side in our world. I should say side by side in our economy, because probably these people participate in the same global economy to a certain extent. Okay, I think that people often make the mistake that global inequality is just the result of an imbalance in global trade, that it could be fixed by fixing the rules, even creating a global minimum wage. Developing a pro-poor agenda within global trade would solve the problem. It may well do to a certain extent, but buying all the fair trade honey and tea and even establishing a global minimum wage won't change the fact that, theologically speaking, our global economic system is one of domination and exploitation. So what do I mean by that? This idea of domination, of a domination system, comes from Walter Wink's Powers trilogy. His focus is mostly on powers and systemic violence, the institutions and social structures that we create to help us organise and function together can become inhabited by principalities and powers, the kind that we read about in the Bible, that take on an impersonal spirituality. In other words, they're not inhabited by sort of demons that come down from the sky with wings, but their character has a spiritual dimension. And we give these institutions and their spirituality power over us by accepting that character or ideology behind them. Human needs become secondary to an acceptance of an institution or ideology. Today, our global economy is dominated by neoliberal capitalism, an idea based on private wealth, competition, pursuit of profit, and its success relies on perpetual growth of the economy. Competition and profit making in order to grow our economy and create more jobs and wealth could be regarded as fairly benign, perhaps even a successful system which provides for our physical and material needs. However, within this neoliberal capitalism, a certain level of inequality is necessary for its functioning, and today it's all too obvious how this has resulted in gross inequalities and injustice across the globe. So, practically speaking, what that means in the UK, for example, is that the main legal requirement of a company is to make money for its shareholders. All other considerations are secondary, legally speaking. So cost-cutting and wages, health and safety, secure contracts are almost necessary within that legal framework in order for a company director to do its job. It also means that those with more capital find it easier to gain more, and those without continue to struggle, only really having their labour to sell as a commodity. And today most economic activity is carried out by private companies or companies floated on the stock market, which are based on this model of pursuing profit at all costs. In 2014, 37 of the world's biggest 100 economies were corporations. Some of you might have seen the corporation film, but I wanted to share a quick excerpt from that as it introduces how a corporation behaves in our economic system. Enton, I think.
Corporations are artificial creations. You might say they're monsters trying to devour as much profit as possible at anyone's expense.
I think of a whale, gentle, big fish, which could swallow you in an instant.
Dr. Frankenstein's creation has overwhelmed and overpowered him, as the corporate form has done with us.
Okay, so most of the people interviewed in that film and speaking there are actually people involved in business. So this is the sort of their understanding of what their own corporations do in the economy. Corporations are massive, and those who run them amass a staggering, eye-watering amount of wealth. And Walter Wink explains Jesus' approach to inequality like this. The gospel of Jesus champions economic equality because economic inequalities are the basis of domination. Ranking, domination hierarchies, and classism are all built on accumulated power provided by excess wealth. In the modern economic system, the poor are kept compliant by the promise of economic and social upward mobility, whereby individuals are able to rise above their class without subjecting to criticism a system built on class inequality. In either arrangement, brute economic control is given mythological and ideological sanction to guarantee that those who have most to lose from obedience to the ruling class become its staunchest supporters. I'm going to leave that up there because it's quite long, and you might want to think about it and unpack it a bit for yourselves. And Walter Wink is not saying that the entire system is doomed. His thesis is that all powers can be redeemed, that all systems have value. They're all capable of serving human needs. So this isn't an entirely political point of view about the capitalist system, but more a theological one. And in this quote, we can also see where individualism and consumerism arise. Much of what is produced in the modern economy is unnecessary. It makes money for some, and others buy it thinking it will enhance their status, their own individual position. This thinking is so insidious that we barely notice it, and we play into its hands all the time, and I absolutely include myself in that. And the early Anabaptists understood this problem. On the Anabaptist website, Unpacking Core Convictions 6 starts with this. A look at the Anglican 39 articles where the Anabaptists are mentioned. The early Anabaptists believed that the riches and goods of Christians were held in common. However, the Anglican Church believed that not to be the case. The riches and goods of Christians are not common as touching the right, title and possession of the same, as certain Anabaptists do falsely boast. And there is a link there, however it's in white text for some reason. Presumably the Anabaptists understood that private ownership created a more aggressive individualism, which resulted in the desire for domination. So as we come to our questions about this section, I want you to think about, do you think our global economy can be redeemed, or do we need to, as the early Anabaptists did, withdraw from the social norms of the day that define civilized society? Back in, there was the 1500s, and until the present day, owning property, whether that was land, well, particularly land, but also other types of property, was seen as part of developing society, there's a belief that we went from sort of agricultural and pastoral societies towards urban, civilized societies where property ownership was really important. So the Anabaptists didn't just say, it wasn't just a case of saying we're holding goods in common, it was a case of saying this progress that you're talking about is not the direction I think we should be going in. It's just a little bit of history. What do you think? Stan, I don't know if you have want to pull this together?
Joe, this is wonderful. As you were presenting this about global economy and corporations, what came to mind is that whatever century we've been in, the improvement of technology has seemed to be kind of the push behind moving and advancing economics. And also it seems that it's moved us more towards competition rather than the well-being of society. And I'm wondering, from your experience and also your learning, is that something that is an adequate critique that the technology advances haven't really helped us as a society per se? They have, but it also it seems like it's fueled the competition between us. And perhaps that's led to much more of the individualism.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think technology has resulted in some wonderful gains for humanity. Back-breaking work is reduced. Health problems therefore are alleviated. Families can spend more quality time together because parents haven't been, their father hasn't been down a mine and has bronchitis, or, women aren't bent over doing back-breaking work all day. So technology, I suppose, has given us so much that it seems healthy. However, I think you're right. This technology has, improving technology, improving transportation, I suppose, has all been particularly aggressive and resulted in serious competition. I think, my background is in the history of empire, so if I can use that as an example, European nations, as they were developing, Britain first of all developing navigation, charting the seas, deciding on time zones. Who gave Britain the right to do that? I don't know, but developing navigation, shipping, ways of extracting resources from the earth right across the globe, was serious competition between European nations, which resulted in domination of vast swathes of the earth and its people. And that the technology developed in Europe was not beneficial to people in, like, the Congo, for example, or India, whose resources were extracted and bought and sold in European markets, and particularly in the city of London, where huge wealth was made by essentially betting on the price of different commodities from different countries. So I think on a global scale, there's a lot that technology has done in terms of breeding competition and resulting in this gross inequality.
John and Linda Stoner, who are viewing this together, have shared a comment and a question, and they say the definitive word here is responsibility. Does that responsibility fall with our governmental structure or with us as individuals? Should our reaching out to our brothers and sisters be forced upon us? So, would it be helpful? Would you like to respond to that, Joe? Or?
I'm sorry, you cut out a bit there, and I didn't hear all of it, and I can't actually see the comment.
Okay. Let me repeat again. It's the comment and question by John and Linda Stoner, where they commenting on your earlier comments, that they say the definitive word here is responsibility. Oh, yeah. Does that responsibility fall with our government structure or with individuals?
Okay. I think, theologically speaking, I think it falls on us. I think one helpful way of looking at this is, I don't know if you know much about the Catholic worker movement, but Peter Morin, it was set up by Peter Morin and Dorothy Day, and Peter Morin was the sort of philosopher behind it, and his main watchword was personalism. I think as Christians we're called to use our own person, our heart, our soul, our body, everything. We're to use everything to help those in need. So I think the responsibility does fall on us. However, most of us don't have insane amounts of power and wealth, and we don't have the ability to make a huge difference on the other side of the world. You know, we can maybe help, we can donate, or we can petition our government about particular things, but it's very, very difficult to feel like we're making a huge difference. So I think what we can do because we can't make the difference ourselves, is to get involved in politics as well in some form or another. Personally, I think that's more about holding government to account rather than being involved in government. I know a lot of Christians who don't agree with that, and they're good friends, and we debate this, but I think holding the structures of power to account is something that we're called to do. So.
I think too that if we remember, the early Anabaptists were involved in government, especially the first couple decades or so of the early Anabaptist movement. They were involved in business, they were involved in government, they were urban, and yet they were involved in this economic system, but they were also trying to provide an alternative way. So they were taking responsibility as individuals as well. I have another question, but I'm going to hold off on that so you can, Joe, so you can continue with your presentation, and then we'll get back to a further conversation.
All right. Well, that does lead us on nicely to the next section, which I have called Taking Action. In this final section, I want to get us thinking about what sharing generously, living simply, caring for creation, and working for justice look like. In light of what we have just discussed about the nature of inequality and the fact that the current global economic system is based on using up ever more resources to maintain high levels of growth, and thus an increase in consumption. I do believe that this is a very personal thing. I think we're all created uniquely, and we have unique gifts and talents and different levels of access to resources to offer others. So I'm going to say much less and let you post ideas or ask questions in the chat window. So, what does sharing generously, living simply, caring for creation, and working for justice look like? Have we or can we do enough for any of these? And how can we keep challenging ourselves as well as caring for ourselves at the same time? So just very briefly, they've all come up at once, but never mind. So sharing generously, again, I have a quote from Dorothy Day. She says, "Yes, the poor will always be with us. Our Lord told us that. And so there will always be a need for sharing, for stripping ourselves to help others. It is and always will be a lifetime job." Stripping ourselves, I think, is key here, and perhaps that relates to responsibility. Just as Jesus taught, we are not to give out of our excess wealth or possessions, but to first think about helping those in need. Then living simply, again, I've returned to the Catholic worker here. For me, they've been a very big inspiration in terms of the house that I live in. That it's based on a Catholic worker model of a house of hospitality for people who are destitute. And voluntary poverty is something that Peter Morin advocated. Dorothy Day says that she condemns poverty, but she also advocates it. For where it's imposed upon someone, it's a social ill, but where we can live simply and in solidarity with people, we can call it voluntary poverty or living simply. So we can choose to live in solidarity with people that can't make use of the excess production and consumption in our society. people who rely on each other to survive, rather than on being an individual and consuming a lot, is quite a different way of being. I'm not sure that I really understand it, but being with people who are not living with vast quantities of wealth is quite enlightening, and I think being involved with people, living simply, sharing what we have, can be really life-giving. And then caring for creation, it's quite a tricky one. I have friends within the church who don't believe that climate change exists, and friends in this link here that vandalised, if you want to call it that, a government building ahead of the Paris climate talks. There's a video there which you can watch at a different time, they explain why they're doing what they're doing. They've been willing to stand trial, to go to court and say their piece about why they believe that what they did was really important, that it highlighted the way that our government is whitewashing. This is the vandalism that they did. They whitewashed a government department. This nonviolent direct action was highlighting that our government is whitewashing the issues around climate change. So do feel free to look at that. I can't explain it all, but I hope that it will be of interest. And then working for justice. Given what I outlined in the previous section, this could mean anything from lobbying for fair pay or overthrowing the whole system and starting a new one. So the word that I came back to here was shalom, or wholeness, and some of you on this in this webinar will have heard of Noel Moles and his writing and speaking on shalom and wholeness, that it doesn't just mean peace. Often the translation into English is peace, and peace be upon you. But when in fact it's about wholeness, it's about everyone having their needs met, whether that's material, physical, or health-wise, and spiritually as well. So this idea of working for justice, for wholeness for everyone, is really important. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions about that. Maybe Stan, you could kick us off.
Anton shared in your comments some examples of it. He said voluntary poverty, and then also shared some of the links for caring for creation. And when you were asking for, how can we share generously, living simply, my neighbor who's in the construction business, helping to employ people with disabilities and I should have added financial needs as well. And then some other things that I've seen, and the typical thing is what churches do, but I think there's also like places where churches are places of safety and refuge for people sharing various experiencing different abuses as well. The one thing I wanted to ask earlier was that it seems like, this kind of goes back to the technology and some of the other issues here, is that our economy has shaped a lot of our behaviors over the decades and centuries, and so it has shaped behaviors, which has reshaped our thinking, which has reshaped our values. So we've moved from more of this care of our society to then it's shaped it along with all the competition that is a part of it, as we become more individualist and more consumerized. I love what technology does, but I also recognize how it is reshaping our thinking, behavior, and values as well. John and Linda, they say, oftentimes the benevolence of corporate America is overlooked. We do feel the banding together to meet the needs is very impressive. And how do we hold that intention with, corporate America or the corporate world being, so consuming, but yet also in the way that they are benevolent in many ways?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that corporations, companies are able to be benevolent. I think today in the UK there's many examples of that, of new small businesses, including policies, like you've said, the example you shared about your neighbour in the construction business seeking to actually help people through employment rather than just thinking about profit and efficiency perhaps, or not having to train people so much, or things like that. There's a lot of examples here, and I think I don't know about in the States, but in the UK there's a whole movement of social enterprises, businesses that are set up with a social value in mind. And the more that I see that happening, the more hopeful I am about the change that could come in the wider economy. That perhaps, this law that I was talking about before, where UK companies, their main legal requirement is to make a profit for shareholders. Even if that law was changed, it would provide so much scope for companies to behave differently. And some of them might not, but with all these, there's so much labeling now, it's rainforest friendly, it's fair trade, it's organic, which are all great things. But if companies could do that without being told that they're making decisions that are ethical rather than profit based, and that's okay, then I think that creates so much more scope. For justice in the economic system.
Yeah. Chuck makes a comment, and
I've
if you'd like
just
to.
noticed Enton's comment. No, I'm just reading that.
Okay. Chuck's comment where he says, I understand the value in voluntary poverty, but I think that it may be more of a personal calling. It is out of my wealth that I am able to help support my brother's infant rescue mission to Kenya. There is also elements of simple living that includes voluntary poverty without making oneself destitute. Would you like to comment on Chuck's statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think voluntary poverty is perhaps the extent that it's possible to make yourself voluntarily poor. That could be quite extreme, or it could just be something fairly simple that you check in with yourself every so often, that you're not relying on riches, or to use a biblical term. But I agree, and I think that a rescue mission in Kenya can't work without the support of those who have money, which makes our economy tick. I do think all these things like money, capitalism, and all that they are benign in themselves. It's just how they're used, and I think nothing happens individually, so someone can't run a charity without the support of others. And it's particularly great, Chuck, that you're supporting your brother's mission in Kenya. It's this interdependency that I think often gets lost today when we talk about what could I do to help. Well, actually, maybe there's a group of people that can create something better by doing it together, and that might mean one person being in Kenya. It might be one person providing finances. It might be one person providing administrative support. So, yeah, I think the interdependence that goes with, it's hand in hand with doing things that are good and provide for others is really important to do it together.
Mm-hmm. Andy Duffy shares a comment in the Gospels. We find the example of the women who helped fund Jesus' ministry and the early church, as well as the praise of the poor widow's offering and the charge to the rich young ruler to sell all he has and give to the poor.
Yeah, I think Jesus challenges the story of the rich young ruler. Jesus is challenging what's difficult for him to do. And then perhaps with the women who fund Jesus' ministry, I think that was quite a radical thing that they did, like women supporting men financially, sort of turning the social structures on their head. But equally, a rich young ruler, someone who's connected with status and power, selling all that they have, would be turning the tables the other way. So Jesus is sort of, I suppose, challenging all sorts of things in what he asks people to do. It's not just about the levels of wealth that people have.
Yeah. And Tom shares a comment. He says where he remembers a CEO that spoke in college about balancing stakeholders and the shareholders. Very good. Both are necessary for a healthy corporation and community. And then last he checked that the company was still successful and hasn't been swallowed up by a bigger corporation. It would be interesting to see if that perspective was still spoken about at the company in another 40 years. And would you like to comment, Joe, on Tom's comment?
Yeah, it would be very interesting. Yeah, maybe some of you have watched the Corporation film, where I showed a little bit from it earlier. It's worth watching if you're interested in this kind of thing. It's very long, about 3 hours or more, possibly, but it's divided into sections, so it's easy to watch in different sittings. And there are some CEOs interviewed in that, and some of them have had big transformations, and they've understood that it isn't just about shareholders, it's about all their stakeholders, it's about their environmental sustainability, and they've had big turnarounds in their company. And I know that one of them in particular, I can't remember what they're called, but they make carpets for like airplanes and cinemas and, the sorts of industrial carpets. And I know that they've taken on as their sustainability director one of the most radical people in the corporate world and transformed things, and they're still doing very well as far as I know. So yeah, it'd be interesting to find out about different companies and what's actually happening inside of them.
Yeah. There's a consultant that I'm aware of. His name is Henri Coetzee. He's from South Africa, and he has, I guess if you want to call it a program or a way of working with CEOs of major corporations. And the comment that he has made, that not all, but he said there are a number of CEOs who are very concerned about the soul of their corporation. And the way that they work with the CEOs then and upper level management is to take them around the world and in their local communities and show them how destitute people are at in ways that those corporations can begin to, in a sense, be redeemed. And my understanding is that Coetzee has been influenced by the Catholic worker movement himself. So, he's created a way of working with leaders in the world today. Well, Joe, what I'm going to do is invite Anton on to give him some time here to share some final instructions, and then we'll turn to you to wrap our webinar this afternoon. Anton?
Thanks, Stan. And those of you that are participating that still have questions, don't be afraid to post them. We'll take a few more moments. But for right now, if you would take a moment to respond to these two polls that we've put up on the screen. The first is, how helpful was the presentation, the content, and the learning that Joe provided? And the second is, how well did this webinar format work for you today? And those evaluative questions help kind of keep us on track. As well as those that are seeking continuing education units, I've just gone ahead and posted up the instructions for how you can get those, and I'll put that live link over in the chat window as well. If you simply follow the link to that form within 24 hours of this live broadcast, please, then we'll be able to get you recorded for continuing education units. But Stan and Joe, back to you for whatever questions are still coming in.
Joe, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to Tom's comment, and then also to wrap up with any final comments that you have. Tom shares, Jesus continues to challenge us to look at things from the Jesus perspective. Recently, there was a political dust-up in the state of Virginia in the United States about who owns compassion and how one interprets the Bible. And so like to invite you to respond to Tom's comment, and then also share any final thoughts share final thoughts that you have.
Well, firstly, I am quite fascinated about how in the US discussing faith and the Bible happens in politics. In the UK, politicians, even if they are religious, keep it at arm's length. And I'd quite like to hear more about that debate, because I think in this country, the only time Christianity is used is when it sort of it separates us from Muslims mostly. That's about the only time we hear about it in the public sphere. But yeah, I think that helps me come to a conclusion, really, that no one political party, no one system of doing economics, no one mode of production or consumption owns the Jesus perspective on it. I don't think that's possible. I think that there are many options out there, and unfortunately those who run our economy have chosen one particular one and expanded it on a global scale over a good few centuries, and some people are incredibly powerful and some people are incredibly destitute and unable to access that same amount of wealth ever, despite what people say about trickle-down theory. I'm not sure that it's the way that our economy works today necessitates some people to remain just people who sell their labour or harvest the commodities that then get manufactured and made into luxury items. So I think there's many problems in our current economic system that we can address, but this side of heaven, you might say, there's no perfect system, and our responsibility is to keep challenging where we see injustice in whatever form and in any system that we find.
Yeah. Tom shares a couple more comments. He said that your statement of the Anglicans brought that dust up to mind about the politics and claiming of God. And then also he shares a link regarding some of the discussion about who owns Christianity. And yeah, Tom, it is a very interesting article. I had the opportunity to see it myself. Joe, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation this afternoon. Your insights and the content in which the way you shared it and the format was just terrific, and you brought out some engaging conversation and some comments in our webinar as well. And we wish you the best and hope that we will connect again sometime in the future, and many blessings to you.
Thank you very much
for everyone that
for
has
inviting me,
attended.
to present,
go ahead.
And for your comments and questions. I was just saying thank you.
Want to thank. I know I'm having one of those I'm having a delay here. Want to say thank you to everyone that attended, and for Enton, all your help, and Joe, your presentation, and for everyone that shared their questions and comments today. God bless, and we'll see you again in March with our next webinar.